My husband, Mark, the man I swore to love and cherish, tried to murder me. He drugged me, dragged my unconscious body from the warmth of our bed, and left me for dead in the middle of a record-breaking blizzard. He left me to freeze solid in the unforgiving Colorado wilderness behind our home, all for a life insurance policy and a piece of land he thought was his for the taking. And his accomplice in this little scheme? My own cousin Sarah, the woman I'd taken in when she had nowhere else to go. They thought I was broken, confused, a fragile mind collapsing under the weight of my job. They thought they had created the perfect victim. They were wrong. They weren't dealing with a victim. They were dealing with a cop. And they were about to learn what happens when you try to erase a woman who knows how to build a case, brick by damning brick. I'm so grateful you're here with me. Before we get into the heart of it, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. Your support means everything, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's the story of how I turned their crime scene into my greatest investigation. Our life, before the unraveling, was painted in shades of white and blue. The endless white of the Aspen Falls snow and the crisp, piercing blue of the Colorado sky. I'm Officer Chloe Anderson, badge number 714. For 10 years, my life was defined by the reassuring weight of the duty belt on my hips, the familiar crackle of the radio, and the unwavering order of the law. I was the only woman on the day shift, a fact that had stopped being a novelty years ago and had simply become a part of the town's fabric. My world was one of clear lines and hard truths, of protocol and consequence. It was a good life, a life of purpose, and at the center of that life was Mark, my Mark. The town's favorite high school English teacher, with his soft-knit sweaters, the faint scent of old books and coffee clinging to him, and a smile that could melt the January frost off a windshield. He was my calm harbor in a world of chaos. When I'd come home, muscles tight after a 12-hour shift dealing with everything from domestic disputes to icy pileups on the interstate, he'd be there. He'd have a mug of chamomile tea waiting, his hands gently kneading the tension from my shoulders, his voice a soothing balm as he asked about my day. "You carry too much of the world, Chloe," he'd whisper, his lips against my hair. "Let me carry you for a while." We lived in a small timber house my grandfather had built, nestled on the edge of the White River National Forest. It was a fortress of warmth and safety, with a great stone fireplace that was always lit and windows that looked out onto a silent world of pine and aspen. This was my sanctuary. This was the life I had chosen, the life I had earned. It was perfect. So perfect, in fact, that when the first cracks appeared, I didn't even recognize them for what they were. It started subtly, about 6 months ago, a forgotten conversation. I'd ask Mark what his plans were for the weekend, and he'd look at me with that patient, loving gaze and say, "Honey, we talked about this yesterday. Remember? We're having dinner with the Hendersons." I'd force a laugh, blaming it on a long shift. Then it was misplacing things, my keys, my wallet, small things that were annoying but easily dismissed. But it escalated. One afternoon, I was at my desk at the precinct, filing a report, and I couldn't remember the suspect's name. I had just interviewed him an hour before. The name was gone, swallowed by a thick gray fog in my mind. I felt a hot spike of panic, my heart hammering against my ribs. I covered it up, found the name in my notes, but the fear lingered. Then came the irritability. I snapped at my partner, Dave, a man I'd trusted with my life for 5 years, over something as trivial as how he'd parked the cruiser. The anger came out of nowhere, a white-hot flash that left me shaking and ashamed. Mark was, of course, the picture of understanding. "It's the job, Chloe," he said that night, stroking my hair as I lay with my head in his lap. "You see the worst of people day in and day out. It's bound to wear on you. It's classic PTSD. All the signs are there." He'd started researching it, leaving articles open on his laptop about police officers and post-traumatic stress. He'd read them to me in his calm, scholarly voice, and every symptom he listed, memory loss, emotional outbursts, hypervigilance, felt like a mirror. I began to believe him. It made a terrifying kind of sense. My mind wasn't failing. It was wounded, injured in the line of duty, just like a broken bone or a sprained ankle. The hallucinations started a month later. A shadow in my peripheral vision that would vanish when I turned. The fleeting image of a snarling dog on the side of the road that wasn't there. I told Mark, my voice trembling, and he held me tight. "It's okay," he soothed. "It's just your brain trying to process the trauma. We'll get you help, I promise. I'll take care of everything." And I believed him. I leaned on him, trusted him completely. He was my rock, my protector. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I'd woken up feeling groggy, the fog in my head thicker than ever. I went downstairs to make coffee, and my eyes fell upon something on the kitchen island, a glint of dark metal against the butcher block. I walked closer, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It was my service weapon, my Sig Sauer P229. It wasn't just lying there, it was disassembled. The slide was next to the frame, the barrel lying beside it, and next to them, like a row of tiny malevolent soldiers, were the 15 rounds from the magazine. I stared, my mind refusing to process the scene. I had no memory of taking it out of the safe, let alone field stripping it on the kitchen counter. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just forgetting a name. This was a catastrophic breach of protocol, of safety, of my own identity. "Chloe?" Mark's voice came from the doorway, soft and filled with a terrible, feigned concern. He walked over, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. He didn't shout, he didn't panic. He just wrapped his arms around me as I began to shake. "Oh, honey," he whispered, his voice catching with practiced sorrow. "It's okay. See? This is what I've been worried about. It's time. We have to get you help, before you hurt yourself." I leaned into his embrace, sobbing with terror and relief, completely oblivious. The help he had in mind wasn't meant to heal me. It was meant to bury me. The gun incident became the cornerstone of Mark's narrative. For me, it was a source of deep, gnawing shame. I reassembled the weapon with the practiced efficiency of a decade on the force, my hands steady despite the tremor in my soul. I cleaned it, locked it in the safe, and tried to pretend it never happened. But the image was seared into my mind, my last line of defense, the symbol of my strength and competence, lying in pieces on my kitchen counter. Mark didn't mention it again, which was somehow worse. His silence was a constant, gentle reminder of my perceived fragility. He started treating me like glass, his voice always pitched a little softer, his movements around me careful, as if I might shatter. He began managing my life in small, insidious ways. "Honey, you look exhausted. Why don't you let me drive you to the precinct today?" he'd offer. Or, "I made you a thermos of that calming tea. Don't forget it." He'd pack my lunch, laying out vitamins he'd bought for cognitive support. Every gesture was a thread in the cocoon he was spinning around me, a cocoon of care that felt increasingly like a cage. My own mind became a hostile territory I was afraid to navigate alone. I started writing things down on sticky notes, dozens of them, plastering them around the house. Turn off stove, lock back door, gun in safe. Each note was a testament to my failing memory, a piece of evidence for the prosecution in the trial against my own sanity. The mistake I'd been dreading happened on a frigid Thursday. The call came over the radio. A possible 211, armed robbery in progress at the gas station on Highway 6. My partner Dave and I were the closest unit. Adrenaline surged through me, a familiar, welcome fire that momentarily burned away the fog. As we sped toward the scene, lights flashing, sirens screaming, dispatch crackled again, giving a description of the suspect's vehicle. A green Ford pickup, late 90s model, with a distinctive crack in the passenger side taillight. I repeated it back, the information locking into place. Or so I thought. 2 minutes later, a truck flew past us going the opposite direction. It was a Ford pickup, and it was green. "That's him," I yelled, my hand already on the wheel to swerve into a U-turn. Dave grabbed the dash. "Whoa, Chloe, hold on. That was a Chevy, and it was dark blue." I slammed on the brakes, the cruiser fishtailing on the icy road. I stared into the rearview mirror, my heart pounding. In my mind, the truck had been a perfect match. Green Ford. But Dave was right. The light from our strobes had played tricks on me. It was a dark, beat-up Chevy. The actual suspect's vehicle was apprehended 10 minutes later by another unit, heading east, just as dispatch had predicted. We sat there in the silence, the engine rumbling. "You okay?" Dave asked, his voice carefully neutral. I couldn't answer. The fire of the adrenaline was gone, replaced by an icy dread. I hadn't just made a mistake. I'd been dangerously, confidently wrong. If I'd been alone, I would have pursued the wrong vehicle, leaving the real suspect to escape. The rest of the shift was a blur of shame. That night, I confessed everything to Mark, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-loathing. He listened patiently, his expression a mask of sorrow. "It's not your fault, Chloe," he said, pulling me into an embrace that felt more like an anchor than a comfort. "Your mind is under attack. This job is killing you. I can't stand by and watch it happen anymore." The next morning, he told me he had a parent-teacher conference and would be late for school. I learned later that he had never set foot on campus. Instead, he had walked into the Aspen Falls Police Department and straight into the office of my commanding officer, Captain Frank Weaver. Weaver called me in at the end of my shift. His office, usually a place of gruff mentorship and shared stories, felt like an interrogation room. Frank was a man carved from the Colorado mountains themselves, solid, weathered, and fair. He'd been my training officer, a man I respected more than anyone on the force. He looked tired. "Shut the door, Chloe," he said, his voice heavy. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Your husband came to see me this morning." My blood turned to ice. "He what?" "He's worried about you, kid. Deeply worried." Frank steepled his fingers, his gaze direct and filled with a discomfort I'd never seen before. He told me about the lapses in memory, the incident with your service weapon. He paused. "And Dave filed a report about the call yesterday. A near pursuit of the wrong vehicle." I felt the floor drop out from under me. Betrayal, sharp and hot, lanced through me. Mark had gone behind my back. He had taken my deepest fears, my professional failings, and presented them as evidence to my boss. "Frank, I can explain." "Chloe, listen," he cut me off, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mark says he's been talking to specialists, that he believes you're suffering from a severe case of PTSD. He brought articles, documentation. He's building a case that you're a danger to yourself and potentially to the public." My mouth went dry. He wasn't just my husband. He was my prosecutor, my judge, and my jury. "He's trying to get you help," Weaver continued, but the words sounded hollow. "He's preparing medical paperwork. He wants to petition the department for an extended medical leave for you, with a mandatory psychological evaluation." I stared at him, my world shrinking to the four walls of that office. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. My husband's loving concern, my partner's dutiful report, my captain's professional obligation. Every path was blocked. I was a cop, caught in a flawlessly designed trap. Mark wasn't preparing to get me help. He was preparing the paperwork for my cage. The captain's words echoed in my head for days, a low, ominous hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. Mandatory evaluation, medical leave. The phrases were clinical, bureaucratic, but I knew what they meant. They were the first steps to taking away my badge, my gun, my identity. They were the first steps to taking away me. I confronted Mark that night, my voice shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "You went to my captain? You went behind my back?" He didn't flinch. He just stood there by the fireplace, the epitome of pained reason. "I did it because I love you, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with a sincerity that made my skin crawl. "I had to. You wouldn't listen to me. You're in denial. Do you think I wanted to do that? To expose your struggles to your boss? It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I would rather you hate me and be safe than love me and end up dead or hurting someone else." His logic was a twisted masterpiece. He had reframed his betrayal as an act of selfless love, a desperate measure to save me from myself. He painted me into a corner where my anger was just another symptom of my illness, another confirmation that he was right. Any protest I made only served to prove his point. I was trapped in a feedback loop of his design. So I retreated. I fell silent, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a suffocating fog of confusion and despair. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was truly losing my mind. The snow began to fall 2 days later. It started as a gentle dusting, a picturesque scene outside our living room window. But by nightfall, the gentle dusting had become a relentless, swirling vortex of white. The news called it a once-in-a-generation storm. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the window panes and piling drifts against the side of the house. The power flickered and died around 8 p.m., plunging us into a primal darkness broken only by the frantic dance of the firelight. It should have been cozy, trapped inside with the storm raging, a fire burning, and the man I loved beside me. But I felt a strange, inexplicable dread. Mark made me a cup of my calming chamomile tea, insisting it would help me sleep through the storm's fury. He'd started making it for me every night, a ritual of his care. I remember the taste was slightly more bitter than usual, but I drank it down, desperate for the oblivion of sleep. The last thing I remember clearly is Buster, my German shepherd, whining at my feet. Buster was my shadow, a magnificent, goofy creature who had flunked out of the Canine Academy for being too friendly. I'd adopted him on the spot, recognizing a kindred spirit who was judged for not being hard enough. He was fiercely loyal, and that night, he was agitated. He kept nudging my hand, his big brown eyes filled with an anxiety that mirrored my own. I stroked his head, whispering for him to settle down, before the drug-laced tea pulled me under into a thick, dreamless black. My next sensation was pain, a deep, searing cold that felt like 1,000 tiny needles piercing every inch of my skin. It wasn't the gentle chill of a drafty room. It was a profound, elemental cold that seemed to be pulling the life right out of my bones. My eyelids were frozen shut, heavy as stones. I tried to move, to call out, but my limbs were leaden, unresponsive. My lungs burned with every shallow, ragged breath. A strange, detached part of my brain, the cop part, began to analyze the sensory data. The rough, icy texture beneath my cheek wasn't my pillow. It was frozen earth and pine needles. The howling sound wasn't just the wind outside my window. It was all around me, whipping and tearing at my exposed skin. I wasn't in my bed. I was outside. A wave of warmth pressed against my side, a solid, breathing heat. Then came a frantic licking on my face, a wet, rough tongue trying to bring feeling back to my frozen cheeks. And then, a sound that cut through the roar of the wind, a deep, booming bark, followed by another and another. Buster. The barks were desperate, urgent, a lifeline in the roaring darkness. Vaguely, I registered another sound, a splintering crash, like wood giving way under immense pressure. Then the barking, closer now, more frantic. I was floating in a sea of cold, drifting away, when the barking became a beacon, the only thing tethering me to the world. The next thing I knew, a different light was piercing my eyelids, a blinding beam that cut through the blizzard. Voices, muffled and frantic, shouting my name. "Chloe, oh my God, Chloe, over here!" It was my neighbor, old Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down. His face, etched with panic, swam into my vision. I felt hands, rough and cold, trying to lift me. My pajamas were stiff with ice, my hair frozen to the ground. As they rolled me onto a makeshift stretcher, my foggy mind registered the scene. I was in the woods behind my house, a good 50 yards from the back door. The snow was knee-deep, and next to me, shivering violently but refusing to leave my side, was Buster. His paws were bloody. I followed his tracks back toward the house. They didn't lead to the door. They led to a shattered window on the basement level. The wooden frame was splintered, the glass gone. He hadn't been let out. He had broken out. He had hurled his 90-pound body through a window to get to me. He had lain against me, sharing his warmth, and barked until he was hoarse, until someone heard him over the scream of the storm. I was barely conscious in the ambulance, hypothermia claiming me. But through the haze of my failing body, One thought burned with absolute, terrifying clarity. I hadn't walked out into that storm. My last memory was of being warm in my bed. I wasn't a sleepwalker. I had never, in my entire life, sleepwalked. As the medics worked on me, a single, horrifying realization began to dawn. Someone had put me there. Buster hadn't just saved me from the cold. He had saved me from my husband. The hospital was a world of sterile white and muted beeps, a stark contrast to the chaotic darkness of the storm. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body a battleground between the invasive, life-saving warmth of heating blankets and the deep cellular cold that refused to let go. My thoughts were sluggish, thick as molasses, but the single, terrifying realization from the ambulance held firm. Someone put me there. When I finally woke up properly, the storm had passed. Sunlight, painfully bright, streamed through the window, reflecting off the pristine blanket of snow that covered everything. Mark was sitting in a chair by my bedside, his head in his hands. He looked up when I stirred, his face a perfect mask of anguish and relief. There were dark circles under his eyes, his hair was unkempt, and his favorite knit sweater was rumpled. He looked like a man who had been through hell. "Chloe," he breathed, rushing to my side and taking my hand. His felt warm and strong, a stark contrast to my own, which was still icy and weak. "Oh, thank God. I was so scared. I woke up, and you were gone." The door was open. I didn't know what to think. I stared at him, my mind trying to piece together the fractured memories. The bitter tea, the dreamless sleep, the searing cold. "What happened, Mark?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "You don't remember?" He squeezed my hand, his eyes brimming with tears. "Honey, you must have been sleepwalking. You've been so stressed, so disoriented. The storm must have triggered something. You just walked right out the back door." His story was plausible. It was neat. It fit the narrative he had so carefully constructed for months. Chloe, the cop with PTSD, whose fractured mind was now leading her into life-threatening situations. But my cop brain, sluggish as it was, began to flag the inconsistencies. "The back door?" I repeated. "I always throw the deadbolt. And the security chain, it's second nature." "It was unlocked," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "The deadbolt was off. The chain was unhooked. You must have unlocked it yourself. You just don't remember." He was smooth, his answers ready. But something was wrong. An alarm bell, faint but insistent, was ringing in the back of my mind. A doctor came in then, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evans. She checked my vitals, her expression a mixture of professional concern and mild curiosity. "You're a very lucky woman, Officer Anderson," she said, making a note on her chart. "Severe hypothermia. Another 30 minutes out there, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Your core temperature was dangerously low." She turned her attention to Mark. "Your husband tells me you have a history of PTSD and have been experiencing episodes of confusion and memory loss." Mark nodded eagerly, playing the part of the devoted, worried spouse. "It's been getting worse, Doctor. I've been trying to get her to see someone, to take time off work. This is the wake-up call we needed." I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through the physical cold. He was using this. He was using my near-death experience as the final, irrefutable piece of evidence in his case against my sanity. He wasn't relieved that I was alive. He was relieved that he had a new, powerful weapon to use against me. "And you have no recollection of leaving the house?" Dr. Evans asked, turning back to me. My instinct screamed at me to tell her everything, to tell her about the locked door, the bitter tea, the feeling of being dragged. But I looked at Mark's concerned face, at the doctor's sympathetic but clinical gaze, and I knew how it would sound. It would sound like paranoia. It would sound like a delusion, another symptom of the very illness he claimed I had. He had insulated himself perfectly. So I lied. "No," I whispered, letting my voice sound weak and confused. "It's all a blank. The last thing I remember is drinking my tea and going to bed." I saw a flicker of triumph in Mark's eyes before he masked it with sorrow. Later that day, Captain Weaver came to visit. He stood awkwardly at the foot of my bed, his big frame seeming to fill the entire room. "Chloe," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, You gave us all one hell of a scare." "Just another Tuesday," I tried to joke, but it came out as a weak croak. "This can't go on," he said, his expression hardening with resolve. "I spoke with Mark. I've read the preliminary report from the hospital. I'm putting you on indefinite administrative leave, effective immediately. We'll schedule your full psychological evaluation as soon as you're discharged. This isn't a discussion, Chloe. It's for your own good." It was the final click of the trap. Mark had won. He had his leverage, his proof. I was officially deemed unstable, a liability. But as I lay there that night, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Buster. He had broken through a basement window. Why? Why not just scratch at the back door? Why would my fiercely intelligent dog choose the most difficult, painful way out of the house? The answer was simple. The back door, the one Mark claimed I had left open, must have still been locked. Buster couldn't get out that way. He had been trapped inside while his human was dying just yards away. He had chosen the only exit available. And then the final, chilling detail emerged from the fog. I remembered the cold, not just the ambient cold of the air, but a specific sensation, the feeling of my ankles being gripped, the rough texture of gloved hands, the sensation of being dragged, my heels scraping against the frozen ground. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory, buried under layers of trauma and drugs, now fighting its way to the surface. I hadn't walked out into that storm. I had been carried. My own home, my sanctuary, was a crime scene, and the lead suspect was sleeping in the chair beside me, pretending to be my savior. The fog in my head began to clear, replaced by something else entirely, an icy, crystalline rage. The investigation had just begun. I was discharged from the hospital 2 days later with a bag full of prescriptions for anxiety and a stack of pamphlets on PTSD. Mark fussed over me like a mother hen, wrapping me in blankets and helping me into the car. His performance was flawless. To any outside observer, he was the picture of devotion, a man terrified of losing the woman he loved. I played my part just as carefully. I leaned on him, my movements slow and deliberate, my eyes downcast. I let him see the fragile, broken woman he had worked so hard to create. "We'll get through this, Chloe," he said as he drove, placing his hand over mine. His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin, but I didn't pull away. I squeezed his hand weakly. "I know," I whispered. "You were right all along. I need help. I'm so sorry I didn't listen." I saw his shoulders relax, a subtle release of tension that told me everything. He believed he had me. He thought the fight was over, that I had finally surrendered to his version of reality. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had almost killed me, and now he was accepting my apology. The house felt different when we walked in. It was no longer my sanctuary. It was a hostile environment, a place where every shadow held a secret and every familiar object seemed tainted. The living room, with its cozy fireplace, was where he had drugged me. The hallway leading to the back door was the path he had dragged my unconscious body across. The forest outside my window was my intended grave. I had to fight the urge to run, to scream. Instead, I allowed my feigned weakness to overcome me. I swayed slightly, pressing a hand to my forehead. I'm a little dizzy." Instantly, he was at my side. "Of course you are. You need to rest. Come on, upstairs. I'll get you settled." Sarah, my cousin, appeared from the kitchen, her face a mask of wide-eyed concern. "Chloe, oh, thank goodness you're home. We were so worried." She rushed forward to hug me. Her embrace was tight, her perfume cloying. All I could think about was her hands on my husband, her complicity in his lies. It took every ounce of my training to not recoil. I let myself go limp in her arms, a damsel in distress. "I'll take care of her, Sarah," Mark said, his voice taking on a proprietary tone. "Why don't you make some of that soup she likes?" "On it," she said with a bright, false smile before scurrying back to the kitchen. As Mark helped me up the stairs, his arms securely around my waist, I realized the new dynamic. I was no longer the capable head of the household. I was the patient, the invalid, and they were my caretakers. This was the role they wanted, the role they needed to complete their plan, and it was the perfect cover for mine. For the next week, I committed to the part. I slept late. I moved through the house like a ghost, wrapped in a thick robe, my steps shuffling and uncertain. I forgot where I put my book. I would zone out in the middle of a conversation, forcing Mark or Sarah to repeat themselves. I let them see me struggling to open a jar of pickles, only to have Mark gently take it from my hands with a sad smile. "Let me get that for you, honey." Every act of feigned helplessness was a carefully calculated move. It fed their narrative and, more importantly, it made them feel safe. It made them drop their guard. They started talking more freely around me, convinced I was too sedated or disoriented to follow their conversations. They discussed my progress, my treatment plan, the upcoming psychological evaluation. "Captain Weaver called again," Mark told Sarah one evening in the kitchen, believing I was asleep upstairs. I was actually sitting at the top of the stairs, hidden in the dark, listening to every word. "He said the board is fast-tracking the hearing for her medical retirement. It's all going according to plan." "And the facility?" Sarah's voice was a low whisper. "I have the brochures. Pine Creek Manor. It's a top-of-the-line private institution, very secure. Once she's admitted, we can file for conservatorship. The doctors there will provide all the testimony we need." Conservatorship. The word hung in the air like poison gas. It wasn't just about getting me off the force. It was about taking legal control of my life, my finances, my property. The pieces of their endgame were slotting into place, and I was listening from the shadows, my cold fury solidifying into a diamond-hard plan. They thought the house was their stage, but they were wrong. It was my interrogation room, and I was about to wire it for sound. My weakness was my camouflage. My silence was my strategy. While they were busy planning my future in a padded room, I was planning theirs in a courtroom. I needed evidence. Hard, irrefutable evidence that would tear their carefully constructed world to pieces. And to get it, I needed to turn my prison into an observation post. I needed equipment, the kind they didn't sell at the local electronics store, and I knew exactly where to get it. The precinct's evidence locker had a discreet special acquisitions inventory for undercover operations. Micro cameras, audio bugs, GPS trackers. All I had to do was get inside. And for that, I needed to create a diversion. I needed Mark and Sarah out of the house for at least 2 hours. The plan began to form. It was risky, but my entire life was on the line. I started complaining of a persistent headache, a side effect, I claimed, of the new medication. "It's this one," I said one afternoon, holding up a bottle of pills the hospital had prescribed. "It just makes my head pound." Mark looked at the bottle. "I'll call Dr. Evans and see if we can get a different one." "No," I said, my voice intentionally frail. "The pharmacy in Silverthorne is the only one that has the other kind in stock, remember? The one she mentioned as an alternative? Maybe tomorrow, if I'm feeling up to it, we could drive over there?" Silverthorne was a 90-minute drive away, a 3-hour round trip. Perfect. Mark's brow furrowed with concern. "I don't want you overdoing it, Chloe." "Sarah could come," I offered weakly. "You two could make a day of it. Get out of the house. I'll be fine here. I'll just sleep." I saw the flicker of an idea pass between them. A day trip, a chance for them to be alone, away from the watchful eyes of their patient. "That's a great idea," Sarah chimed in, a little too enthusiastically. "We could grab lunch. It would be good for us to get a break." Mark looked at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of suspicion. I gave him none, just a tired, grateful smile. "I'd really appreciate it," I whispered. "I just want this headache to go away." He finally nodded. "Okay, tomorrow then. We'll go tomorrow." The bait was set. While they were gone, I wouldn't be sleeping. I would be gearing up for war. The next morning, I watched from the bedroom window as Mark's Subaru pulled out of the driveway, kicking up a plume of fresh snow. Sarah was in the passenger seat, laughing at something he'd said. The sight of them together, so casual and carefree on their way to betray me, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. The moment the car disappeared around the bend, the fragile, broken woman I had been playing for a week vanished. I moved with a speed and purpose that felt foreign and yet deeply familiar. My first stop was the precinct. Getting in wasn't the problem. I still had my key card. The challenge was avoiding suspicion. I dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a heavy parka, and a beanie pulled down low. I parked in a public lot 2 blocks away and walked, keeping my head down, my face shielded from the security cameras I knew were positioned over the main entrance. I slipped in through a side door used for maintenance, its lock notoriously easy to bypass with a laminated card. The station was quiet, most of the day shift out on patrol. I moved through the hallways, a ghost in my own workplace, every sound magnified. The squeak of my boots on the linoleum, the distant ring of a phone, the hum of the overhead lights. It all felt alien. My heart was a trip hammer against my ribs. This was reckless. If Weaver or any other officer saw me, my charade would be over. The unstable cop, off on medical leave, sneaking around the station, it would confirm every lie Mark had told. I reached the evidence locker, my hands shaking slightly as I entered the code. It was a muscle memory I could have performed in my sleep. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing rows of neatly labeled shelves. My target was a hard-shell Pelican case on the top shelf, marked UC Surveillance Kit number 3. Inside was a treasure trove of high-tech espionage gear, tiny button cameras, audio recorders the size of a thumbnail, magnetic GPS trackers, and a handful of listening devices disguised as everyday objects. A phone charger, a smoke detector, a digital clock. I worked fast, selecting what I needed. 2 button cams, 3 audio bugs, and the charger. They were small enough to fit into the deep pockets of my parka. I relocked the case, closed the vault door, and wiped down the keypad, erasing any trace of my presence. The entire operation took less than 5 minutes. Leaving the station was even more nerve-wracking than entering. I held my breath as I slipped back out the side door, my body screaming with the tension of the trespass. It wasn't until I was back in my car, the contraband heavy in my pocket, that I finally allowed myself to exhale. Phase 1 was complete. Back at the house, the clock was ticking. I had maybe 2 hours, tops, before they returned. I laid the equipment out on the kitchen table, my mind shifting from thief to technician, my training kicking in. I had to place these where they would capture the most intimate, unguarded moments, yet be completely invisible to the naked eye. The house I knew like the back of my hand was now a tactical grid. The first bug went into the master bedroom. I pried the faceplate off a power outlet near the bed and attached the tiny microphone to the wiring inside. It was powered by the outlet itself, meaning it would never run out of batteries. They could lie in my bed and whisper their secrets, and I would hear every single word. The second went into the kitchen, the heart of the house, where they seemed to have most of their strategy sessions. I affixed it to the underside of the heavy butcher block island, a place no one would ever think to look. The USB charger was the most brilliant piece of tech. It was a fully functional charger, but it also housed a high-fidelity microphone and a Wi-Fi transmitter that would stream audio directly to a secure app on a burner phone I'd hidden away. I swapped it with the charger they used for their phones on the small table in the living room, right next to the sofa where they watched movies. It was hiding in plain sight. The cameras were trickier. They required a direct line of sight. I took one of the small button cams and carefully worked it into the decorative wicker basket full of pine cones that sat on the mantelpiece. A tiny, nearly invisible black lens now peered out from between 2 pieces of bark, aimed directly at the sofa, the perfect vantage point to capture their cozy evenings together. The final camera was for Mark's study. It was his private space, the place he went to prepare lesson plans and grade papers. I suspected it was also where he managed his secret life. There was a row of thick, leather-bound classic books on his shelf, the kind people buy for decoration but never actually read. I chose a copy of Moby Dick. Using a small craft knife, I carefully hollowed out a space in the pages, just big enough for the second button cam. I positioned it so the lens peered out through a tiny hole I'd drilled in the spine. It was now aimed directly at his desk and computer. The entire process was a whirlwind of focused, frantic energy. My hands were steady, my mind sharp and clear in a way it hadn't been for months. This was what I was trained for: assessing a scene, anticipating behavior, gathering intelligence. The fog of confusion had been a poison, but this was the antidote. This was control. With minutes to spare, I swept the area for any sign of my work: a stray wire, a fleck of plaster, a misplaced book. There was nothing. I sat down on the sofa, breathing heavily, my body thrumming with adrenaline. I picked up a book and forced myself to relax, to slip back into the role of the convalescing patient. I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. I took a deep, steadying breath and arranged my face into a mask of weary tranquility. Mark and Sarah walked in, arms laden with shopping bags, their faces flushed from the cold and their shared adventure. "Hey, sleepyhead," Mark said, smiling as he dropped a kiss on my forehead. "Did you rest well?" "Like a log," I lied, my voice soft and slightly groggy. "How was the trip?" "Good," Sarah chirped, already unpacking groceries. "We found the pharmacy, and we even had time to grab that delicious chili at the brew pub you like." They moved around the kitchen, chattering about their day, completely oblivious. They didn't see the tiny microphone under the counter, listening to their cheerful lies. They didn't see the camera on the mantelpiece, watching their every move. They thought they were in control, that they were the hunters and I was the prey. They had no idea that the trap had been sprung and the walls of their own home were now closing in. The waiting was a unique form of torture. For 2 days, I maintained my cover, moving through the house like a wraith, while every nerve in my body was screaming with anticipation. I had downloaded the secure monitoring app onto an old burner phone I'd kept from a past case, and I kept it hidden in a loose-leaf binder full of old recipes in the kitchen. At night, I would lie in my bed, feigning sleep, my ears straining to hear any incriminating whispers. But they were careful. The house was quiet. My own paranoia began to creep in. Had I been too hasty? Had I misinterpreted everything? Was I, in fact, the crazy one? The answer came on the third night. It was a Thursday. Mark believed I had taken one of the sleeping pills Dr. Evans prescribed, a pill I had actually palmed and flushed down the toilet. He thought I was safely unconscious until morning. He waited a full hour after I'd gone to bed before he moved. I lay perfectly still, my breathing deep and even, as I heard his footsteps creak softly down the hall and then descend the stairs. My hand trembled as I reached under my bed for the burner phone and a pair of earbuds. I navigated to the app, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I selected the audio feed from the living room, the microphone hidden in the phone charger. At first, all I heard was the crackle of the fireplace, then a soft murmur of voices. I pushed the earbuds in deeper. Is she completely out? It was Sarah's voice, a breathy whisper. "Like a light," Mark answered. His voice was different, deeper, more relaxed. The gentle, concerned tone he used with me was gone, replaced by something confident, almost predatory. "That new prescription is a miracle worker. The doctor said it can cause deep, uninterrupted sleep. She won't hear a thing." I heard the clink of glasses. "Good," Sarah said, "because I can't keep my hands off you another second." My stomach clenched. I switched the feed to the living room camera, the one hidden in the pinecone basket. The image that filled the tiny screen on my phone was grainy, lit only by the flickering firelight, but it was unmistakable. Mark was on the sofa, and Sarah was straddling his lap. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangled in his hair. They were kissing. Not a gentle, stolen kiss. It was a hungry, desperate kiss, filled with a familiarity that spoke of months, maybe years of practice. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as my husband's hands roamed freely over my cousin's body. I saw him whisper something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh, a low, throaty sound that was nothing like the sweet giggle she used around me. This wasn't a recent fling, a stress-induced mistake. This was a well-established, comfortable affair. They were a team. "I hate this, Mark," Sarah murmured, pulling away slightly to look at him. "Hate sneaking around like this in her house, seeing her pathetic, sad face every day." "I know, baby, I know," he soothed, his hand stroking her back. "But you have to be patient. It's almost over. Weaver is pushing the medical board. Another few weeks, and she'll be in Pine Creek Manor, and we'll have the conservatorship. Then this house, the land, everything, it'll be ours." "What about the insurance?" she asked, her voice turning sharp and businesslike. "Is it all in place?" $5 million policy, pays out on accidental death, he confirmed. The blizzard was supposed to be it, a tragic sleepwalking accident. It was perfect. If it wasn't for that goddamn dog. He trailed off, his voice thick with frustration. I felt the air leave my lungs. Accidental death, $5 million. He wasn't just trying to commit me. The night in the snow wasn't a warning shot. It was a failed execution. He had intended for me to die. That night, I wasn't just a casualty of his plan. I was the entire point of it. "We just have to be more careful now," he continued, his tone reassuring. "The long game is safer anyway. We build the case, prove she's incompetent and a danger to herself. Once she's in the system, it'll be easier. Another accident inside the facility. It'll be tragic, but no one will question it. A mentally ill woman, depressed and confused. These things happen." My blood ran cold. He was planning to try again. He was going to have me locked away, stripped of my credibility and rights, and then he was going to finish the job. I watched them for another hour, a silent, unseen voyeur to my own betrayal. I watched them drink my husband's expensive scotch. I watched them make plans for my future as if I were a piece on a chessboard. They talked about selling off my grandfather's land, about a trip to Europe they would take once the mess was cleared up. They made love on the sofa in front of the fireplace, in the heart of the home I had built, the home I had shared with him. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep, too cold for tears. It was a hollow, echoing agony that settled deep in my bones. Every memory I had of him, of our life together, was instantly corrupted. His gentle touch, his loving words, his concerned gaze, it was all a lie. A meticulously crafted performance designed to lull me into a state of utter trust while he plotted my destruction. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage vows, he had betrayed my life. When they finally went upstairs, Sarah slipping into the guest room and Mark creeping back into the bed beside me, I lay there in the darkness, the images from the camera burned onto the back of my eyelids. I could smell Sarah's perfume on him, a faint, sickly sweet scent clinging to his skin. He rolled over, his arm draping across my waist in his sleep. The casual intimacy of the gesture was so grotesque, so profoundly violating, that I had to bite down on my hand to keep from screaming. The man sleeping beside me, the man whose warmth I had sought comfort in for 12 years, was a monster. And I was married to him. But not for long. The shock was already hardening into something else, something cold, sharp, and patient. The fury of a woman scorned was nothing compared to the fury of a cop with a case to build. The revelation of the affair was a gut punch, but the financial motive was the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. The insurance policy explained the murder attempt, but it didn't explain the urgency, the sheer desperation behind Mark's actions. A $5 million payout was a life-changing sum, but Mark had never struck me as a man obsessed with wealth. He preached the virtues of a simple life, of finding richness in literature and nature, not in bank accounts. It was another part of his carefully constructed persona, a lie so complete that even I had bought into it. The truth, as it turned out, was far uglier and more pathetic. The break came from the camera in his study, the one hidden in the spine of Moby Dick. For days after discovering the affair, I monitored the feeds obsessively. I watched him at his desk, grading papers under the warm glow of his lamp, the picture of a dedicated teacher. But late at night, after Sarah and I were supposedly asleep, his real work began. The schoolwork would be pushed aside, and he would open a different browser, one with a blacked-out privacy screen. He would navigate through a series of encrypted links, his movements quick and furtive. I couldn't see the screen clearly, but I could see his face. The calm, scholarly mask would fall away, replaced by a raw, naked anxiety. He would run his hands through his hair, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting back and forth as he typed. He made phone calls, his voice a low, desperate whisper. I couldn't make out the words clearly through the study door, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the sound of a man begging. I needed to hear those conversations. The next day, while he was at the school and Sarah was at the grocery store, I retrieved the audio bug from the kitchen and moved it. I risked entering his sacred study, the air thick with the scent of his cologne and his lies. My hands were shaking as I crawled under his heavy oak desk and affixed the tiny microphone to the underside, right next to the port where he plugged in his headset for his late-night calls. It was a gamble. If he discovered it, the entire investigation would be compromised. That night, I didn't have to wait long. Around 1 a.m., he slipped into the study. I put in my earbuds, my breath held tight in my chest. I heard the familiar click of his headset plugging in, and then his voice, clear as a bell, filled my ears. "Rocco, it's me," he said, his voice strained. "Listen, I need more time. Just another few weeks. I swear." A new voice came over the line, gravelly and cold, with an accent that was pure East Coast mobster. "Time? Your time ran out last month, Mark. My boss is not a patient man. You know the terms." I know, Mark pleaded, his voice cracking. "But the plan hit a snag, a complication. It's being resolved, I promise. The asset is about to be secured. It's a sure thing." "You said that last time," Rocco retorted, his voice dripping with menace. "You said the sleepwalking accident was a sure thing. Turns out, not so much. Now you owe us for the initial investment, plus interest, plus a penalty for the screw-up. The number just keeps getting bigger, Teach." The number? My mind raced. What number? "How much do I owe now?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. "As of this morning? $250,000, Rocco said, the number landing like a physical blow. "And it goes up by 10 grand every week you're late. You took our money for your little online sports betting habit. You leveraged it, and you lost. Big time. That's your problem, not ours. You knew the risks." I felt my world tilt on its axis. A gambling debt. A massive, terrifying gambling debt to the kind of people who don't send polite reminder notices. It wasn't just about greed. It was about survival. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to save his own skin. "I'll have it," Mark said, a desperate bravado in his tone. "The conservatorship is almost finalized. Once I have control of her assets, her property alone is worth millions. I can start liquidating. It'll be more than enough to cover everything." "You better hope so," Rocco said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Because if you don't have our money by the end of the month, the conversation we're going to have won't be on the phone. We know where you live, Mark. We know about your pretty little school teacher life. We know about the cousin, and we know about the cop wife." There was a chilling pause. It'd be a real shame if something were to happen to one of them. A real accident this time. The line went dead. I heard Mark let out a ragged sob, a sound of pure, abject terror. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a cornered animal, a weak, pathetic man who had made a catastrophic mistake and was now willing to kill to cover his tracks. His betrayal wasn't born of a cold, calculating evil, but of a desperate, cowardly fear. He wasn't sacrificing me for a life of luxury with Sarah. He was sacrificing me to save himself from having his kneecaps broken, or worse. The knowledge was both terrifying and clarifying. I was dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose, a man being squeezed by forces far more dangerous than he was. He wasn't just a threat to my freedom and my life. He was a ticking time bomb. The pressure from Rocco and his associates explained the escalating timeline, the increasingly risky moves. He wasn't just in a hurry. He was on a deadline that would be paid with either his money or his life, or mine. I lay in the dark, the sound of his ragged breathing from the study echoing in my ears. He thought the mob was the biggest threat he faced. He had no idea. The real threat was lying in his bed, listening to his every panicked whisper, and building a case that would ensure the only place he'd be safe from the mob was a maximum security prison. The gambling debt was the engine, but I still didn't have the full roadmap of their conspiracy. I knew Mark was desperate, but I needed to understand the scope of their greed. His fear of Rocco explained his urgency, but it didn't explain Sarah's role. She wasn't being threatened by mobsters. Her motivation was something else, something colder. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. After the call with Rocco, Mark was a wreck. He didn't come back to bed. Instead, I heard the soft thud of the guest room door opening and closing. He had gone to Sarah. I switched the audio feed to the charger in the living room, guessing that's where they would go to talk. I was right. I heard them settle onto the sofa, the leather creaking. I turned on the camera. The image was dark, but I could see their silhouettes against the dying embers in the fireplace. Mark's head was in his hands. "He called," Mark choked out. "Rocco. The deadline is the end of the month. He threatened you, Sarah. He threatened Chloe." "Then you need to get him his money." Sarah's voice was sharp, devoid of the sympathy he was clearly seeking. "Panicking isn't going to help. We have a plan. Does it still work?" "It has to," he said, his voice ragged. "But it's taking too long. The conservatorship, the evaluation, it's all paperwork and waiting. The blizzard was supposed to be clean and fast." "The blizzard was sloppy," she countered coldly. "Leaving it to chance was stupid. This way is better. It's documented. It builds a story that no one can question." She paused, and I heard the rustle of paper. "Did you forget what this is really about? The money from Rocco is just the start." "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm looking at the future," she replied. "The reason I signed on for this mess in the first place." I heard her unfold a larger document. "The preliminary zoning approval for the Blackwood Basin. Your wife has no idea, does she, that her precious grandfather's log cabin sits on 50 acres of land that's about to be rezoned for a luxury ski resort?" A chasm of ice opened in my chest. The cabin. My grandfather had left it to me, a rustic, sprawling property deep in the mountains. It was my sacred place, my escape. I'd always considered it emotionally priceless, but financially modest. "The developers have been buying up the surrounding parcels quietly for years," Sarah continued, her voice filled with a greedy excitement. "Your wife's land is the final piece of the puzzle. It's the only parcel with direct access to the main road and the river. They can't build without it. The moment that zoning goes through, this land isn't worth a couple million. It's worth 20, maybe more. $20 million. My grandfather's legacy, the place I'd learned to fish and build a fire, was now the jackpot at the end of their murderous rainbow. The insurance money pays off Rocco and gives us operating capital." Sarah laid out the plan with chilling clarity. "But the land is our retirement, our new life. Once you have conservatorship, you can sell it on her behalf. Her doctors at Pine Creek will attest that it's in her best medical and financial interest. It's a clean transaction." So this was her price. This was what it took for her to help murder her own cousin. Not just a share of the insurance, but a stake in a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. She was a parasite who had attached herself to my family, waiting for the perfect moment to feed. Mark let out a shaky breath. "But to get any of it, she has to be out of the picture. The blizzard." "Tell me again," Sarah said, her voice dropping lower. "Tell me exactly what you did. I need to know there are no loose ends." And he told her. He confessed everything, his voice a low monotone, as the camera in the pine cones recorded his every word. The words were a physical assault, each one landing like a blow. "I crushed 3 of the sleeping pills into a fine powder," he began. "The ones from that online pharmacy, the untraceable ones. I mixed them into her chamomile tea. She said it tasted bitter, but she drank it anyway. She always does what I tell her to." The casual cruelty of that last sentence stole my breath. I waited until she was completely limp. It didn't take long. I checked her pulse, made sure she was just unconscious, not, Then I put on my gloves and my heavy boots. I pulled her out of bed. She was dead weight. I had to drag her. I remember her head bumping on the stairs. I was worried it would leave a mark, but I didn't have time to be gentle. He was describing my attempted murder like he was recounting a difficult day at the office. I dragged her out the back door and into the woods, far enough so it would look like she got disoriented in the storm. I just left her there, in the snow. I came back inside, locked the door from the inside with a deadbolt, and took off my boots. I made sure there was no snow in the house. Then I went back to bed. I set my alarm for 3 hours later. The plan was to wake up, discover she was missing, and call 911 in a panic. The cold would have done the rest. It would have been the perfect, tragic accident. He fell silent. Sarah didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "You did well. It was a good plan. It wasn't your fault the dog went crazy. We just have to stick to the new plan now, the slow, methodical one. It's safer. No more mistakes." I turned off the feed. I couldn't listen anymore. I lay in the darkness, my body rigid, my mind a storm of silent, screaming rage. The love I had for him didn't just die. It putrefied. It turned into something black and toxic in my veins. He hadn't just tried to kill me. He had recounted the act with a cold, logistical detachment that was more monstrous than any act of passion. She always does what I tell her to. He had used my love, my trust, as a weapon against me. He had planned to let me freeze to death and then sleep soundly in our bed. The pain was so immense it transcended itself, crystallizing into something else, a purpose, a cold, hard, and absolute mission. Arresting them wasn't enough. Prison was too kind. They had conspired to turn me into a non-person, a ghost whose assets they could liquidate. They had tried to erase me quietly, in the dark, under the cover of a storm. My vengeance, I decided in that moment, would be the opposite. It would be loud. It would be public. It would be undeniable. They had wanted to humiliate me in my weakness. I would humiliate them with my strength. An idea began to form, the faint outline of a stage, a crowd, and a spotlight. The annual Police Benevolent Association Gala was in 2 months. The whole town would be there. My colleagues, my captain, the press. It was the perfect venue. They wanted to create a tragic accident. I was going to give them a public execution. The days following Mark's confession were a masterclass in self-control. The rage and pain didn't vanish. They settled deep inside me, a core of glacial ice fueling a white-hot fire. I had to live with him, with them, in that house. I had to eat the food Sarah cooked, listen to Mark's feigned concern about my recovery, and smile weakly when he kissed my forehead before leaving for work. Every moment was a performance. Every interaction was a strategic move in a war they didn't know we were fighting. My mission was now clear. I was no longer just a victim gathering evidence for a prosecutor. I was the lead investigator in my own attempted murder case, and I was building an airtight cage for 2 monsters. The audio and video recordings were damning, but a good defense attorney could try to argue they were taken out of context, that it was just talk, dark fantasy. I needed more. I needed physical evidence. I needed a paper trail. I needed to connect their words to their actions in a way that no jury could ever question. I shifted my focus from surveillance to forensics. My home was still an active crime scene, and I began to process it with the meticulous care of a professional. I started with the tea. Mark was still making me my calming chamomile every night, and I was still pretending to drink it before flushing it down the bathroom sink. One evening, after he handed me the steaming mug, I feigned a coughing fit. "Oh, this is too hot," I gasped. "I'll let it cool down a bit." He bought it without a second thought. The moment he left the room, I poured a small sample into a sterile vial I had acquired from a first aid kit. I labeled it carefully with the date and time and hid it. I would do this every night, creating a clear pattern of a sustained drugging attempt. The next step was tracing the source of those drugs. In his confession, Mark had mentioned an online pharmacy, the untraceable ones. Untraceable was a challenge, not a fact. Using a library computer 2 towns over, I created a new anonymous email address and started digging. I knew Mark's habits. He was arrogant, but lazy. He would have used a search engine, probably with simple, direct terms. I started with phrases like, buy Ambien, no prescription, order sedatives online international. The search led me down a rabbit hole of illicit digital storefronts based in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. These sites were designed to disappear, but they always left a digital footprint. I focused my search on payment methods. They didn't take credit cards, they dealt in cryptocurrency. Mark was a high school English teacher. The odds of him being a sophisticated crypto investor were slim. He would have needed to buy the currency from a more mainstream exchange using a traceable source of funds. It was a long shot, but I cross-referenced the names of the top 3 illicit pharmacies I found with known cryptocurrency exchanges. After hours of painstaking work, I found a match. A pharmacy called Meds Global had a documented link to a specific Bitcoin wallet. Now for the final piece. I needed access to Mark's financials. While he was in the shower one morning, I risked logging into his laptop. His password, ironically, was Chloe and Mark forever. The vomit rose in my throat, but I pushed it down. I navigated to his bank statements, and there it was. 3 months ago, a $500 transfer from our joint checking account to a mainstream crypto exchange. The amount was small enough to not raise alarm bells, easily explained away as an investment. He had used our shared money to buy the currency he needed to purchase the drugs he would use to poison me. I took a photo of the transaction with my burner phone. It was the first link in a chain that connected our finances directly to my nightly cup of bitter tea. While I was on his laptop, I did a deeper search of his files. Buried in a folder labeled Lesson Plans, Spring Semester, was another folder simply titled Contingencies. My blood ran cold. Inside were scanned documents, a forged power of attorney giving him full control over my medical and financial decisions, dated 2 weeks from now. A life insurance application I had never seen, with a signature that was a decent but not perfect forgery of my own. And a series of emails between him and a high-risk loan company documenting the initial phases of his gambling debt before he moved on to Rocco's more dangerous associates. He had kept records. His arrogance was my greatest asset. My final target was Sarah. I needed to understand her financial situation. I knew she had claimed to be broke after a messy divorce, which was why she had come to live with us. While she and Mark were out for a walk one afternoon, I went into the guest room. It felt like a violation, but the rules of engagement had changed. I searched her belongings. In the bottom drawer of her dresser, under a pile of sweaters, I found a bank statement. It wasn't from a local Colorado bank. It was from a large national one. The balance wasn't zero. It was over $50,000. The statement showed a large, one-time deposit made 2 years ago, right around the time of her messy divorce. Curiosity piqued. I used my burner phone to run a public records search on her ex-husband. His name was Michael. I found a news article from a local California paper. The headline read, "Local man exonerated in embezzlement case." The article detailed how Michael, a financial planner, had been wrongly accused of stealing from his clients. The charges had been dropped when new evidence pointed to his then-wife, Sarah. She had never been charged, citing a lack of concrete proof, but she had been the primary suspect. The $50,000 deposit was likely her share of the money she had stolen before she turned on her husband and fled the state. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator who had found a new hunting ground. I now had a complete picture. Mark, the desperate gambler. Sarah, the experienced con artist. They were a perfect storm of weakness and greed. I had the recordings of their conspiracy. I had a sample of the poison tea. I had the digital breadcrumbs leading to the online pharmacy. I had the forged documents and the evidence of their financial motives. The case was built. The cage was ready. All that was left was to choose the perfect moment to spring the trap. The evidence was a heavy, dangerous weight. I carried it with me everywhere on the burner phone, a digital record of my husband's monstrosity. But evidence is useless without an audience. A lone wolf can track its prey, but to make a clean, public kill, you need a pack. I had the what, the who, and the why. Now I needed the how, and for that, I had to take the biggest gamble of my life. I had to trust someone. My choice was simple. There was only one person on the force, in the town, who I believed was incorruptible, and who had known me long enough to see past the character Mark had assassinated. Captain Frank Weaver. Mark had used Frank's integrity against me, feeding him a story of a cop on the edge, a story Frank had to act on professionally. But I knew the man behind the badge. I had to believe that the cop who trained me, who taught me to trust my gut above all else, would recognize the truth when he saw it. Approaching him at the station was out of the question. I was on leave, a pariah under a psychological microscope. So I went to his home. On a Sunday evening, I drove to his quiet house on the other side of town. I parked down the street and watched the warm light spilling from his windows for a full 10 minutes, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. This was the point of no return. If he didn't believe me, if he thought this was another symptom of my illness, he would have no choice but to report it. He would call Mark, and my life would be over. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the shoveled path and knocked on his door. He opened it himself, a half moon of reading glasses perched on his nose and a newspaper in his hand. He stared at me, his face a mixture of shock, concern, and professional caution. "Chloe," he said, his voice low, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Frank," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "Not as my captain, as the man who taught me how to be a cop. I need you to give me 10 minutes and listen. If you still think I'm crazy after that, I'll walk away and check myself into the nearest facility." He studied my face, his gaze intense, searching. I didn't flinch. I met his eyes, letting him see the desperation, but also the clarity, the focus. After a long moment, he stepped back, holding the door open. "Get in here before you freeze," he grumbled. He led me into his study, a room that smelled of leather and wood smoke. He didn't offer me a seat. He stood with his arms crossed, waiting. The message was clear. Convince me. I didn't waste time with preambles. I took out the burner phone. "Before Mark came to your office," I began, "he had already tried to murder me. He failed. Since then, he and my cousin Sarah, who is also his lover, have been systematically drugging me to create the symptoms of a complete mental breakdown to facilitate a second, more successful attempt." I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, the professional skepticism I knew so well. It was the same look I would have given someone telling me a story so outrageous. "I know how this sounds," I said, my voice dropping, "which is why I brought this." I unlocked the phone, opened the monitoring app, and selected the audio file from the night Mark confessed everything to Sarah. "I need you to listen to this. It's long, but it's everything." I placed the phone on his desk and hit play. I watched him as the sound filled the quiet room. The calm, methodical voice of my husband, detailing how he'd crushed the pills, how he'd mixed them into my tea, how he'd dragged my unconscious body down the stairs. I watched Frank's face. The professional caution melted away, replaced by a stony stillness. His arms uncrossed. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the phone as if it were a venomous snake. When Mark's voice described leaving me in the snow, Frank's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. When he recounted his plan to wake up and discover my body, I saw Frank's knuckles turn white. He listened to the entire confession, the insurance policy, the affair, the plans to have me committed and killed in a secure facility. He listened to Sarah's cold, calculating voice as she detailed the multi-million-dollar land deal that was her ultimate prize. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and violent. Frank didn't move for a full minute. He just stared at the phone. Then, very slowly, he looked up at me. The concern and skepticism were gone. In their place was a cold, hard fury I had only seen a few times in my career, usually in the face of true, unadulterated evil. "That son of a bitch," he finally said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He sat right there in my office. He looked me in the eye and cried. He sold me a story, and I bought every goddamn word. He stood up and began to pace, his movements tight with contained rage. "I put you on leave. I ordered your evaluation." I played right into his hand. "You did your job, Frank," I said quietly. "You acted on the evidence you were given." He made sure it was convincing. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes blazing. "This isn't just about fraud or attempted murder anymore, Chloe. He used this department. He used me as a weapon against one of our own. This is personal." He walked back to his desk and leaned on it with both hands, the seasoned captain replaced by the enraged mentor. "The evidence you have, it's enough. We can get a warrant, pick him and the cousin up tonight." "No," I said, my voice firm. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the desperate subordinate pleading my case. A quiet arrest is too good for them. They tried to erase me in the dark. They deserve to be exposed in the light, in front of everyone. He raised an eyebrow. "What are you proposing?" "The PBA Gala," I said. "It's in 5 weeks. The whole town will be there. The brass, the press, every cop in the county. He'll be there, playing the part of the devoted husband, accepting sympathy for his sick wife. I want to take him down there. I want to strip away his mask in front of the entire world he worked so hard to deceive." Frank was silent for a moment, considering it. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. It was a predator's smile. "A public spectacle," he said, nodding. "Humiliation as a form of justice. I like it. It's unconventional. It's messy. But God knows, they've earned it." He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. "You're not just a survivor, Chloe. You're a damn fine detective. What's the plan? And what do you need from me?" "I need a partner," I said. "I need you to run interference for me. Keep the department off my back. And on the night of the gala, I need you to have a tactical team ready. I'll give the signal, and you make the arrests." "Done," he said without hesitation. "We'll do this off book until the last possible second. Just you and me. He thinks he's isolated you. He has no idea you just gained a very pissed-off ally." He picked up the burner phone, his expression grim. "Let's go over everything you have. Every piece of evidence. I want to know this case better than they do." The gala wasn't just my stage anymore. It was our trap. And for the first time in months, I wasn't fighting alone. With Captain Weaver as my silent partner, the psychological dynamic of the game shifted entirely. I was no longer just surviving. I was actively hunting. The 5 weeks leading up to the gala were the most intense and dangerous of my life. I was living a dual existence. By day, the fragile, mentally deteriorating patient, and by night, a detective coordinating a complex sting operation with my captain. Our communication was clandestine. We used prepaid burner phones, changing them weekly. We met in person only twice, once at a remote fishing spot Weaver frequented, and once in a crowded diner 2 towns over. Mostly, we communicated through encrypted texts, planning every detail of the gala takedown. Weaver was my rock, my sounding board, and my shield. He handled the internal politics of the department with masterful skill. When the medical board requested my preliminary psychiatric reports, he delayed them with bureaucratic red tape. When Mark would call him for updates, feigning concern, Weaver would play along, assuring him the process was moving forward and commending him for being such a stand-up guy. Every word was a lie, a carefully placed stone on the path to Mark's destruction. My role was to escalate my decline. I had to make Mark and Sarah believe their plan was working perfectly, that I was spiraling exactly as they had designed. I had to push them into a state of absolute confidence, making them arrogant and sloppy. It was the most difficult acting job of my life. I began to lose larger blocks of time. Mark would come home from work to find me sitting in a chair, staring into space, claiming I couldn't remember the last few hours. "I think I was reading," I'd say, my voice trembling, "but I can't be sure." I started talking to myself, making sure Sarah would, accidentally, overhear me muttering nonsensically in the kitchen. I would misplace my car keys and then have a full-blown panic attack, sobbing that I was losing my mind. I'd let Sarah find them in the sugar bowl or some other ridiculous place. Her sympathy was a disgusting, cloying performance. She would wrap her arms around me, stroking my hair. "It's okay, Chloe," she'd coo. "We're here for you. We'll take care of you." I could feel her smirking against my hair. The pièce de résistance was the wandering incident. One afternoon, I waited until Mark was due home. I put on my coat but left my boots by the door. I walked outside in my socks, trudging 50 feet down the snow-covered driveway before hiding behind a thicket of pine trees. I watched him pull up. I saw the flash of panic, then annoyance, on his face when he saw the front door ajar. He stormed inside, and I heard him shouting my name. I waited a full 5 minutes before I stumbled out from behind the trees, shivering, my socks wet and cold. "Chloe, what the hell are you doing out here?" he yelled, his concern barely masking his fury. I don't know," I stammered, my teeth chattering convincingly. "I think I was looking for Buster. Is he inside?" Buster, of course, was curled up asleep in front of the fireplace. That night, the living room camera captured the conversation I had been hoping for. "I can't take much more of this, Mark," Sarah said, her voice strained. "She's a ticking time bomb. Today she wandered out into the snow in her socks. What if she does it at night? What if a neighbor sees? It could unravel everything." "You're right," he agreed, his voice grim. "It's time to accelerate. I'm going to call Pine Creek Manor tomorrow. I'll tell them it's an emergency situation, that her psychiatrist recommends immediate admission. I'll forge the letterhead tonight. With her wandering, no one will question the urgency." It was exactly what I wanted. He was getting impatient. He was getting sloppy. Forging a psychiatrist's letter was a high-risk move, another felony charge we could add to the growing list. I had the recording. I texted Weaver the update. "He's accelerating, forging medical documents tonight." The reply came back instantly. "Let him. More rope to hang himself with. Stick to the plan. Gala is a go." The final 2 weeks were a blur of psychological warfare. Mark and Sarah began treating me less like a person and more like a piece of furniture that occasionally did something unpredictable. Their conversations became more brazen. They openly discussed the logistics of having me committed, the sale of my assets, their future plans, sometimes while I was in the same room, staring blankly at the television. They believed I was so far gone I couldn't even process their words. Every syllable was a gift, another digital file logged and saved on the burner phone. One evening, Mark came home with a brochure. He sat down with me on the sofa, his arm around my shoulder, his voice gentle and full of a terrible fake kindness. "Honey, I want to show you something," he said, opening the glossy pamphlet. It was for Pine Creek Manor. The pictures showed serene gardens, comfortable-looking rooms, and smiling, kindly staff. It looked like a resort, a prison disguised as a paradise. "It's a place where you can rest, Chloe," he said softly, "a place where experts can help you get better. No stress, no pressure, just healing." I looked at the pictures, my face a mask of confused vulnerability. Do I have to go?" I whispered, playing my part to the very end. He squeezed my shoulder. "It's what's best for you, for us. We're just waiting on the final approval from the board. It'll be soon." He smiled, a triumphant, proprietary smile. "Don't you worry about a thing. I've taken care of everything." I leaned my head on his shoulder, looking at the brochure for the place he intended to be my living tomb. "Okay, Mark," I whispered. "I trust you." The lie was effortless now. The ice in my veins was absolute. He thought he was finalizing the plans for my committal. He had no idea I was finalizing the seating chart for his public execution. The night of the annual Police Benevolent Association Gala arrived on a blast of frigid March air. The event was the social highlight of the year for law enforcement in our corner of Colorado, a night of forced mingling, stiff formal wear, and lukewarm chicken dinners. This year, it was being held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel downtown, a cavern of dark wood, crystal chandeliers, and hushed anticipation. For me, it was a coliseum. Getting ready was a surreal experience. Sarah helped me with my dress, a simple, elegant navy blue gown. Her hands were gentle as she zipped it up, her reflection in the mirror smiling encouragement at mine. "You look beautiful, Chloe," she said. "Just try to relax and have a good time tonight." The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost artistic. Mark was waiting downstairs, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo. He looked handsome, distinguished, the perfect image of the concerned husband putting on a brave face. He held my coat for me, his touch lingering on my shoulders. "Ready?" he asked, his voice soft. "As I'll ever be," I answered, my voice a whisper. The drive into town was silent. I stared out the window at the snow-covered landscape, my mind a whirlwind of tactical checklists. Weaver's undercover team was already in place, disguised as hotel staff, a bartender, a waiter, a valet. The AV technician was one of ours, a tech-savvy rookie from the cybercrimes unit. The local news crews had been tipped off by Weaver about a major departmental announcement to ensure their cameras would be rolling. Everything was set. Walking into the ballroom on Mark's arm felt like stepping onto a stage. The room was buzzing with conversation, the air thick with the sense of perfume and politics. Instantly, we were the center of a vortex of sympathy. Colleagues I had known for years approached us, their faces etched with concern. "Chloe, good to see you out," one said, clapping Mark on the shoulder. "Heard you've been having a rough time." "We're taking it one day at a time," Mark answered, his voice a perfect blend of sorrow and strength. "She's a fighter." He played the part beautifully. He was a tragic hero, a man burdened by his wife's inexplicable decline, bearing it all with grace and love. They looked at him with admiration. They looked at me with pity. I kept my eyes downcast, my expression fragile, letting their pity wash over me. It was part of the fuel. Weaver found us near the bar. He gave Mark a firm, sympathetic handshake. "Mark, glad you could make it. And Chloe," he said, turning to me, his eyes conveying a message no one else could see. "Showtime. You look lovely tonight." "Thank you, Captain," I murmured. The first hour was an eternity of small talk and feigned smiles. I allowed Mark to guide me through the room, to fetch my drinks, to speak for me when my anxiety became too much. He was in his element, soaking in the praise for his unwavering devotion. Sarah, who had arrived separately, orbited us at a distance, occasionally catching Mark's eye with a subtle, triumphant smile. At 8:30, the formal program began. The master of ceremonies, a slick local politician, took the stage. There were awards, speeches, and a moment of silence for fallen officers. Then came the part I had been waiting for. "And now," the politician boomed, "we have a special presentation from one of our community's most respected educators, Mr. Mark Anderson, who wishes to say a few words about the often unseen pressures our officers face." A ripple of anticipation went through the crowd. This was unscheduled, a special addition to the program that Mark's friends had arranged. I watched as he straightened his bow tie and walked toward the stage, his face arranged into a mask of noble gravity. He was about to give the performance of his life. He stepped up to the podium, and a hush fell over the room. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the uniformed officers, the detectives, the town officials. "Thank you," he began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "I'm not an officer. I'm just a teacher. But I am married to one. I've had a front row seat to the courage, the sacrifice, and the silent burdens that the men and women in this room carry every single day." He paused, taking a shaky breath. He looked directly at me, his eyes glistening. "My wife, Officer Chloe Anderson, is the bravest woman I know. But the things she has seen, the trauma she has endured in the line of duty, it has taken a toll. A toll that many of you understand, but that is so hard for those on the outside to see." He was brilliant. He was weaving my illness into a larger narrative about the heroism and suffering of all police officers. He was making them all a part of my story, co-opting their shared trauma for his own monstrous ends. "For months now, I have watched the woman I love struggle with the invisible wounds of her job," he continued, a single, perfect tear rolling down his cheek. "With PTSD, with memory loss, confusion, and a pain she cannot articulate. And I just want to take this moment to ask all of you, to support the ones you love, to see the signs, to get them help before it's too late. The room was captivated. People were nodding, dabbing at their eyes. He had them. He had them all. He was about to receive a standing ovation for plotting to murder his wife. From the side of the ballroom, I saw Weaver give me a subtle nod. The AV tech gave a thumbs up. The cameras were ready. The trap was set. I stood up from my table. My movement was small, but in the rapt silence of the room, it was a thunderclap. Every eye turned to me. Mark faltered at the podium, his brow furrowing in confusion and annoyance. "Chloe, honey, what are you doing?" he whispered into the microphone, his stage voice momentarily breaking. I didn't answer him. I started walking toward the stage, my steps slow, steady, and deliberate. The fragile, broken woman was gone. The pity in the room began to curdle into confusion. This was not the behavior of a confused invalid. This was the stride of a cop with a purpose. I walked up the side steps and onto the stage, stopping directly beside him at the podium. I looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of stunned faces. Then I turned and looked directly at my husband. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, my voice clear and cold, my own hand reaching for the microphone. "You should have gotten me help, but you shouldn't have been my biggest threat." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Mark's face, which had been a mask of pained nobility, contorted into a flash of pure, undisguised fury before he smoothed it back into concern. "Chloe, sweetheart, you're confused," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss, trying to reach for my arm. "Let's get you back to your seat. You're not well." I stepped away from his touch, my eyes never leaving his. "Oh, I've never been more well, Mark. My mind has never been clearer." I turned to the audience, my voice ringing out, amplified by the sound system. "My husband is right. I have been living in a fog for months, a fog of confusion, memory loss, and paranoia, but it wasn't caused by PTSD. I pulled a small remote from the clutch purse I was carrying. It was a simple 2-button device given to me by the AV tech. The signal. I aimed it at the tech booth at the back of the room and pressed the first button. Behind us, the massive projector screen that had been displaying the PBA logo flickered to life. The first image to appear was a high-resolution photo of the living room camera feed. Mark and Sarah, wrapped in each other's arms on our sofa, locked in a passionate kiss, the firelight illuminating their betrayal for everyone to see. The room erupted. It wasn't a gasp this time. It was a roar of shock and disbelief. Sarah, who was sitting near the front, shot to her feet, her face ashen. Mark whirled around to look at the screen, his jaw dropping. He looked like he'd been shot. "This fog," I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel, was induced by a cocktail of powerful, unprescribed psychiatric drugs. Drugs that my husband, Mark Anderson, has been crushing into a powder and mixing into my tea every single night for the last 6 months. I clicked the remote again. The image on the screen changed to a split view. On one side, a toxicology report from an independent lab highlighting the names lorazepam, zolpidem, and risperidone found in the tea sample I had collected. On the other side, a photo of Mark's banking history showing the cryptocurrency purchase used to buy those exact drugs from an illicit online pharmacy. "He did it to make me seem unstable," I said, my voice cold and hard as the Colorado winter. "To build a case with my captain, with my doctors, and with all of you that I was losing my mind. Why? So he could have me involuntarily committed." Mark lunged for the microphone, for my arm, for anything. "This is insane. She's having a breakdown. Someone help her." But before he could take 2 steps, 2 of Weaver's undercover officers, the ones who had been posing as hotel security, moved in, blocking his path. They were silent, solid, and immovable. I clicked the remote a 3rd time. The audio file of Mark's confession began to play, his own voice filling the ballroom, chilling and clear. I crushed 3 of the sleeping pills into a fine powder. I mixed them into her chamomile tea. She always does what I tell her to. The silence in the room was now absolute, a ringing, horrified void. Every person was frozen, listening to the voice of the man on stage, calmly detailing how he had drugged his wife. I dragged her out the back door and into the woods. I just left her there, in the snow. It would have been the perfect, tragic accident. I let the recording play, my eyes locked on Mark. I watched the blood drain from his face. I watched the panic, the terror, the dawning realization that there was no escape. The mask wasn't just stripped away, it was vaporized. He was naked, exposed, his monstrosity laid bare for the world to see. When the recording detailed the $5 million insurance policy and Sarah's plan for the multi-million-dollar land deal, I saw her try to bolt. She made a desperate run for the exit, but another of Weaver's officers, the one who had been tending the bar, stepped into her path, shaking his head slowly. Her escape was cut off. The recording ended. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, from the side of the stage, Captain Frank Weaver began to walk forward, his dress uniform immaculate, his face carved from granite. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of righteous fury. He was followed by 4 uniformed officers, their presence cutting through the stunned crowd like a ship through water. Weaver walked right up onto the stage, past me, and stopped directly in front of Mark. He didn't speak. He just stared at him. The full weight of his contempt, his betrayal, and his authority communicated in that one look. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying the authority of a judge passing sentence. "Mark Anderson," he said, his voice ringing with disgust, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and assault with a deadly substance." The uniformed officers moved in. One of them pulled Mark's hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the ballroom sound system, a sound of finality, of justice. Mark didn't resist. He was catatonic, his eyes wide with the sheer shock of his public detonation. Across the room, 2 other officers were approaching Sarah's table. I watched as they cuffed my cousin, her body trembling, her face buried in her hands as she began to sob. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Weaver turned to me. There were 100 emotions in his eyes: pride, sorrow, respect. He gave me a single, sharp nod. Then he turned back to the microphone Mark had used to cry his crocodile tears. "Ladies and gentlemen," Weaver announced to the stunned audience, "it appears we have an officer who has been the victim of a heinous crime, and thanks to her courage and her exemplary police work, we have just apprehended the perpetrators." He looked at me. "Officer Anderson, you are a credit to this department." The room, which had been silent, exploded. It started as a few hesitant claps, then grew into a wave, a thunderous, rolling standing ovation. My colleagues, my friends, the people whose pity I had endured, were now on their feet, their applause a roar of support, of vindication, of respect. They weren't clapping for a victim. They were clapping for a cop who had just closed the most important case of her life. I stood there, under the hot lights, the sound washing over me, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the ice inside me begin to melt. The weeks that followed the gala were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and the slow, difficult process of reclamation. Mark and Sarah, faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, had no choice. Their high-priced lawyers, initially full of bluster, quickly saw the hopelessness of their position. There would be no trial. The public confession at the gala, combined with the recordings and forensic evidence, had sealed their fates. Sarah, ever the opportunist, was the first to break. She took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Mark in exchange for a lesser charge. Her testimony was a pathetic, self-serving account that painted her as a manipulated victim of Mark's charm, a narrative no one, least of all the prosecutor, believed. She was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and fraud. I felt nothing watching her being led away, just a vague sense of pity for a woman whose soul was so completely hollow. Mark, stripped of his charm, his allies, and his freedom, was a shadow of the man who had commanded that ballroom. He pleaded guilty to attempted murder and a string of other felonies. In court, he stared at me, his eyes filled not with remorse, but with a flat, reptilian hatred. He hated me not for what he had done, but because I had outsmarted him. I had refused to be his victim. His sentence was 40 years to life in a maximum security prison. He would be an old, broken man before he was even eligible for parole. The system I had dedicated my life to had worked. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had been served. The department reinstated me with a full commendation and a promotion to detective. The psychological evaluation I eventually took was a formality, but a healing one. The therapist, a sharp, insightful woman, helped me unpack not just the trauma of the murder attempt, but the years of subtle gaslighting I had endured without even realizing it. But my true healing didn't happen in a courtroom or a therapist's office. It happened in the mountains. That summer, I took an extended leave of absence. The first thing I did was drive up to my grandfather's cabin, the 50 acres of land that Sarah had coveted so much. The developers, having read about the case, sent me a formal, multi-million-dollar offer. I sent them back a one-word reply: no. I spent the summer there with Buster, breathing in the clean, pine-scented air and letting the silence of the wilderness wash over me. I fixed the leaky roof, cleared the overgrown trails, and fished in the river, just as my grandfather had taught me. I rediscovered the quiet, capable woman who existed outside the uniform, the woman Mark had tried so hard to erase. One crisp September afternoon, just as the aspens were beginning to turn a brilliant gold, I built a fire in the old stone pit outside the cabin. I took out a small box from my car. Inside were the last vestiges of my life with Mark. Photos, old letters, and at the very top, our marriage certificate. I looked at the document, at my signature next to his, a promise of a future that had turned out to be a lie. I felt a pang, not of loss, but of release. I folded the paper, held it over the flames, and let it go. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash, drifting away on the mountain breeze. Buster nudged my hand, dropping a well-chewed tennis ball at my feet. I laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that echoed through the trees. I picked up the ball, drew my arm back, and threw it as far as I could. He took off after it, a blur of joyful, unrestrained energy. I watched him, my heart full. He was my partner, my goofy, loyal, window-smashing hero. He had saved my life not just once in the snow, but every day since, with his unwavering, unconditional love. My life wasn't perfect anymore. The clean lines had been shattered, the hard truths replaced by a more complex understanding of human darkness, but it was my own, stronger, freer, and built on a foundation that no one could ever shake again. This story is a brutal reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones we invite into our homes, the ones who know our fears and our weaknesses intimately. Mark's betrayal wasn't just an act of violence. It was a profound violation of trust, a weaponization of love itself. Chloe's journey from a gaslit victim to the architect of her own justice is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's a story where the evidence isn't just found in a lab, but in the loyalty of a dog, the integrity of a mentor, and the unshakable instinct of a woman who refused to be silenced. The most satisfying justice isn't just seeing the guilty punished, it's seeing the survivor rise from the ashes, not just whole, but stronger and more powerful than before. This story teaches us a vital lesson. Your sanity is not a negotiation. Your instincts are your most reliable informant. In the face of manipulation, the greatest act of rebellion is to trust yourself, even when the person you love most is telling you that you can't. So let me ask you, have you ever had a gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, even when everything on the surface looked perfect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could be the warning sign that someone else needs to see. Thank you for listening.